Hey friends, what's up? I am super excited for today's video because after months of trying things out, I finally landed on an SVG animation library I want to use, and in this video we're going to make that library from scratch. Not only that, but by the end of this video we're going to make this awesome animation so you can make those Vox style videos. How beautiful is this, friends? But before we get started, don't forget to like and subscribe, and you can also support me by becoming a patron. Alright friends, so I want to share my thought process with you because I think that's more important than any code you're going to write. You're going to see the actual code is so easy, but that wasn't the hard part. The hard part was trying 1,000 things until every failed and I found one that I like. So as you can see, I did some crazy things. I made this declarative SVG timeline in Svelte. I might make a video on this, it's like interesting. So you can see basically here I'm using Motion 1, so I get this timeline, and here you have a declarative timeline as well, but this didn't work. And why it didn't work? Because I want to be able to tween any value. For example, if you take the view box from the SVG element, you can't really animate this using CSS keyframes, and I want to be able to animate any value. And some animation libraries like GSAP can do that, which is great, but I want to have complete control. So basically this was my research, and let me show you briefly the code, how this looks like. So here we can define values that we want to animate. I named this signal because a store in Svelte is basically like a signal, but it's really not a signal. You can learn more about stores in my other video, but we just define values that change over time like Motion Canvas does it, right? And here is how we do it. So we can say await, and now we can chain anything. We can say this element, we can play a sound, and then we can animate the values. We can play animations at the same time using this helper function. So again, here we're playing the sound and animating the values. And here we're also animating the text, and this all happens in order using procedural code. As you can see, here is the SVG. Basically, here we're just using these values, which are just values that change over time, right? So this is how we get this animation. Alright friends, so let me explain this animation lore to you. Basically, Motion Canvas is this beautiful library written in TypeScript where you can write some procedural code and you can make videos. So if you go to get started, here in their example, we can look how we can write these animations. So let me just zoom in. As you can see, this might look like React, but it just uses JSX, so you don't have to instantiate this circle using new or whatever. And every value under the hood is a signal, so these are just values that change over time. And Motion Canvas also uses generators to play these animations in sequence. You can see here is yield, so this is going to run sequentially. And this is what inspired me to make Animotion. And you're probably thinking, okay, if Motion Canvas is so great, why did you make this? Well, basically, I wanted things to suit my needs, how I want to do animations, because compared to doing this example, I just want to define a slide, which I can control, so it's easier to record. You can just go here to this example. So this is how you do it in Animotion. These are just slides, so you can write your own code examples or whatever, and you just write slides declaratively like this. And basically, you can use your arrow keys just to record, and this is really simple. So you can just full screen it, you can use OBS to record your presentation, and that's really simpler to me than having to record your audio and then synchronize it to what's happening on the screen, right? But of course, the missing piece is the animation, right? Because this is bring your own animation. You can use anything. You can use GSAP, Motion 1, and etc. It's just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So I was thinking for a long time, how can we make an animation library that complements Animotion but isn't opinionated? Because in Animotion, there is no concept of a timeline. You are the timeline. And after trying all of these things, I realized that Motion Canvas was right all along. And what do I mean by that? Well, let's go and look actually how it works. We can defer these generators, but here is what's actually going on under the hood that got me thinking. Motion Canvas, actually, let me just find the code. So here is how it works. So you can see actually it yields this tween, so it gives it a value, and then you can move this circle from -300 to 300 on the screen. And that got me thinking, in Svelte we already can define values that change over time using Svelte stores, and we actually have a built-in Svelte store, tweened and spring. So in the next part I'm going to show you how we can recreate this example in Svelte. Alright friends, so let's recreate this animation in Svelte. So I'm going to go to our project here, I'm starting from scratch. Let's create this script tag. I'm going to create a circle, so I'm going to say const circle, and now I'm going to import tween store, so this is a value over time that changes, right? And you can pass it a value like this, or you can pass it an array, or objects, it can interpolate between those values, no problem. So we can do something like this, we can say cx, and now I'm going to give it the same value, so now we need to update it, You might have seen the syntactic sugar like this is Svelte components, but this doesn't work in regular JavaScript files. And I also want access to the options. So this is the only way that we can set options. We can use the actual methods on the Svelte store. Let me just actually show you this. If I console log circle and I open my developer tools here, you can see here we get an object which is the Svelte store. It has a set, subscribe, and update method on it. So now we can update the value of the circle. I can say circle set. What value do we want to update? CX. So we can say 300, and then we can also set a duration, which should be 2 seconds. That's basically it. So we can create an SVG, and then we can also set a view box. And people mistake this view box for the width and height of the SVG, but actually think of it like a camera. So you have this sheet of paper, which is your SVG, and then you're saying, okay, this is my X and Y 0, 0. So that's the top left corner of the SVG. And then you're like, okay, what part of it I want to look at? So it can be 200 by 200 pixels. So this isn't the actual width and height dimensions of the SVG element itself. You can define this yourself by saying style. And now we can say width 100%. So this is also going to preserve the aspect ratio by default of an SVG. But here I have to specify minus 300 because they're using these unusual numbers. I just want to replicate the example. So I'm just really doing this. And then I can just set, okay, look at 600 by 600 pixels so we can see the circle. All right, so now we're going to create circle. Another problem with Motion Canvas, they're using Canvas, so they have to implement all of these things from scratch. I don't know about you, but I don't have 200 IQ. So I prefer to use SVGs because we already have these shapes for drawing things and etc. We can animate. So I'm going to say CX, and then we can just use a store by saying circle CX. Now we can specify CY, which is going to be 0. We're going to specify the radius, which is 40, but you can give it whatever you want. And then let's give it the same field. So you can say pound E13238. All right, so let me just save this and let me look at it. Okay, so you can see here we recreated this example. We're not using CSS or anything because it's so limiting. This is what I was talking to you about. If you want to animate this view box, I think GSAP can do it, but using regular CSS keyframes, this is not possible. And later we're going to see how we can use the SVG view box to get that camera-like effect, which looks really awesome. But there's another problem with the default tween store. We can't really tween between colors. So for example, you can specify fill here, and we can say that it's white. So we can say FFF, and now we can just save this color. So now we can specify for the fill to use our store value. So we can say circle fill, and actually this should be our value that we want to animate. So I can just paste it over here, and here we can define it fill. We're going to say FFF, but you're going to see this really can be animated. And let me see if even it has there. Okay, it cannot interpolate string. But thankfully the people who made Svelte are incredibly smart. So if we go to the Svelte Motion docs, they made it possible for you to pass any interpolation function, and you can use the one from D3, so this can basically tween anything under the sun. So you can see in their own docs, they show you this example that you can use interpolate lab from D3, and you can pass it here to interpolate. Now you can interpolate any value that you can think of. So let me show you how that works. I just have this package installed, so we can import interpolate. I'm not going to use interpolate lab, I'm going to use interpolate from D3 interpolate because I want D3 to be in charge of everything here. So I don't have to think about this, etc. I just know that I can tween any value. And how cool is this? So now let's move this configuration object from our animation here. We can specify a configuration object here. So you can keep the duration the same. So here is how you do it. So you can pass interpolate, and you can pass interpolate from D3, but of course, this is JavaScript, you can just make it shorter like this. And also to make our animations more beautiful, we can use an easing, and the one I like the most by default is cubic in out. So we can also import this from Svelte easing. Let me just move this to the top. All right, so now if we save this, let me just close the documentation. And you can see it interpolates between those values. How beautiful is this, friends? So now you can animate any value that you want. But you know what's also awesome? The Svelte Tween Store returns a promise, so we can await the animation and we can do a sequence of animations. So let me just show you how that works quickly. So we can go here and we can import onMount, and then we can pass it a callback like this. I'm going to move this animation here. Let's just make it async. So now let's make the circle animate to 300 and then let's make it go back to minus 300. As you can see, this isn't going to work if you just do it like this and you specify it again, because it's going to use the last one as they're going to run at the same time. So if I save this, you're going to see this is not going to work because it's animating in the same place, right? But we can await it because it's a promise. Like this. Await, let me save it. And now you're going to see it's going to go to 300 and to negative 300. But there's another downside to using the set method, and as you can see, we have to define this value again. Like, why do we have to define this field when we already defined it? If we don't do that, we're going to run into problems because it's not going to update. So you can see it's like, oh, field, I don't have no field, no idea what this is. Well, basically, instead of using set, we can use the update method. So let me just change this circle. Actually, I'm going to remove this one. Let's update this set. Update. So now we get access to the previous value because we pass in a callback. So we can get all the previous values and then we just need to spread the previous values and then we can just say, okay, just update these values. We don't really care about anything else. And this is a syntax error because we're just returning an object, but we have to put it in parentheses to be valid. Otherwise, you have to put it in an entire block and say return, right? So basically, that's how we can do this. And now if we copy this over again, now we can only update the value that we're interested in. All right, so I'm going to save this and let's see if everything works. We just refresh. Oh, did I put the same? Oh yeah, have to negative 300. Let's see. How beautiful is this, friends? So being able to tween values and run animations in sequence is the foundation of every animation library. Alright friends, this is great, right? But this is no way to live your life. Imagine if you had a slightly more complicated animation, how tedious this would be to write. Well, thankfully we can make a wrapper around this, but first I'm going to create a wrapper around this onMount, so we can define a function animate. We can pass in a function, callback in this case, and then we can just use onMount and pass it a function, and instead of using onMount here, we can just say animate. You might be confused at first, like, everything works as expected, that's right. But why are we doing this? Basically, at the end, we're just going to place this into a lib folder. So when we decide to publish this library, our user can just import animate. They don't have to know about onMount and etc. So this is just a nicer API. All right, let's get to the interesting part. So let me show you how I want to use this library. And of course, inspired by this, you can make this library whatever you want. As before, I want to await this thing that we define these values over time. But in this case, I don't want to do this set update. I want the library to take care of this for us. I want to do something like circle to inspired by animation libraries like GSAP. Then I want to pass in an object. Then we can say CX 300. And then we can say again fill. And we can also give it the same color. But here's the twist. Not only do I want to say to, I don't want to do something like this. I don't want to have to define something here and then have to do it again. I want to be able to chain these methods. So I want to do something like this. I want to say circle to, and then when that is done, I want to also say CX minus 300. All right, so how can we do that? Well, first we're going to create a signal function. You can name this whatever you want. As I said, stores in Svelte are similar to signals, but they're not actually signals. So we can go here and we can specify function signal, which is going to accept the values, the same values that we pass to our store here. And then we're also going to instantiate these options by default, so you don't have to do this. So now we're going to leave it at this. And now we're going to say options here. So let's give it some default options. We can say duration is going to be 1 second. We can also say easing cubic in out, and then we can also say interpolate, and that's basically it. So let's give it a function body. So now we really don't need any of these things here because we're going to create this signal instead. So if we go here, we can say const circle. Now we can say signal instead, and now we can pass it our parameter. We can say minus 300, and we can give it a white field by default. So you can see how much simpler this already is. So let's continue. So how can we create a custom store in Svelte? And that is really simple. The only thing we have to do is return the subscribe method. And how do we get the subscribe method? Well, if we say const store, and if we say tween, we can pass it again the values and options. So again, if you look at this store, it has subscribe, update, and set on it, right? So you can do something like this. You can say return, you can say subscribe store.subscribe. But why do we do this when we have this structure? So we can go here, and we can say subscribe update. That's basically it. So now we can remove this. Perfect. So now let's create our chaining method. So we can say function to, again, you can also do this as a class, but then depends how you want to implement this. You can create it using a function and then expose that to the user so they don't even know they're using a class, right? That's how you can sneak in those classes, right? So we can say to, again, we have values, and then we can also pass it options to override things. So remember how we use that update method? Well, now we have this update method directly. We can say update previous, and now we can also return, spread the previous value, and spread the new values. That's it. Alright, so how do we reference this element itself, right? Because we can just use to once and then it won't do anything, right? Well, basically we need to return a reference to itself. And we can do that easily by saying return this. Same as when using classes, because in JavaScript, everything is an object. This keyword is going to reference to the signal function. And also don't forget to return the to function at the end. But you're going to see this isn't going to work as you expect. So if I go here and comment this one out, the first animation is going to run because there is really no problem with that. And I also made a mistake here. It's not value, but values. So let me just save this and you're going to see this should work, right? But we have no fill and etc. Let me see what it is. I think I put in an extra E here. Okay, so this works as expected. If you see, we can't really chain this. If we go here, nothing happens. Even if we refresh it, let's check our console for errors. Really, nothing happens. Well, basically, we're returning a promise. So we need to somehow figure out how to chain promises. And to make things worse, I really don't want to execute this animation immediately. I want some animation queue or sequence to push this animation into. And then when we push all of the animations, then I want to play them. Alright, so the problem becomes how do we chain promises, right? And thankfully, this is really simple to do. So you can go to this beautiful site, JavaScript info. You can read about chainable promises. You can make an object denable. Yeah, here it is. So basically, they're using a class as an example, but any object, including a function, if you return a function, then this becomes almost like a promise, but not really. Basically, when it sees it, it's going to treat it as a promise. Using the await keyword, we're going to turn it into a promise. And then when we add all of our animations to the queue, it's going to run then. So instead of confusing you more with my explanation, let me just show you and everything is going to be clear to you. First, we need to create tasks. So this is going to be our queue. So I can go here and I can say let tasks. And then instead of doing our animations immediately, how do we defer the execution of something? Well, we can just pass it into a function. So inside of here, let me just go say tasks. We can say push. So now we can give it a function and let's just move this entire update function inside. And I just realized I also can pass it options. So we can go here and pass it options like this. So now when the user wants to override the delay, duration, or whatever for the specific animation, they can easily do that. Alright, so now let's make this function denable. And we can make this really simply by saying function then, and then we also get this resolve passed in. So if you're familiar, this is the same as new promise, and then you get resolve reject. And basically, I think they call it the executor. I don't know, it has some weird name, but basically this is the same thing that gets passed when this becomes a denable. So that's what you get. And let's also make this async. Cool, so you can name this whatever you want, res resolve. So we can loop over each task and execute it. So we can do this like saying for. We can say const task of task. And now what do? We just await every task. That's how simple that is. And then when all of the tasks are done executing, we can say that it's resolved. So you can say resolve, and that's basically it. And also don't forget to return subscribe to, and then. And now when you go back here, everything should work. So let me just save this. And now you can see everything works as expected. So let me just close this, refresh. And we can see we created a denable, and now we can chain promises. Alright, but we actually have a bug in our code. So for example, let's say that you do some animation, you do something else, and then after a while you want to reuse this same reference, and you're like, okay, this should run 2 times, right? But actually this is going to run 3 times. So let me just save this, and let me just restart. So let's go. So this is going to be 1, 2, and 3. So it animates 3 times. And why is that? Well, basically, we need to flush our queue or task, right? And you might do something like this. You might go here, you're confused what's going on, right? And then like console log, maybe I can log tasks. And then you open your developer tools. And then you can see, okay, this looks weird. First we had like 4, and now we have 4 again. Like, what is going on. Even if you refresh, okay, so there's 2, and now they doubled. What is going on, right? So basically this is how you can debug it, and you're probably used to that, but what I want to encourage you to do is just slap a debugger statement, and this is so much easier than using console log because you're going to see your entire application state at a glance. So you can slap a debugger, and immediately this is going to break here. Let's just go to the debugger, and again, we can just play this so we can see the state of this when this debugger hit this, so we can see what's going on with the task. Okay, we have 2 of them. So now when we play this and we trigger this again, you're going to see something weird is going to happen. When we hover again over the task, what is this? 4 of them. And this is so much easier. You actually get to see how your application executes. So learn how to use the debugger because it's going to make your life so much easier. But okay, enough rambling from me. Let me just go here. I'm going to remove this debugger statement. After we resolve everything, we just need to clear the task queue. So you can say task equals to empty array. And let me just go over here. I'm going to bring things back as they were. And now let's see, this should only play 2 times. 1, 2, and that should be it. Now our animations work as expected. Alright, this is awesome, but what if you want to play animations at the same time? Well, basically, let's just simulate this by going here to our circle. I'm going to create text values that change over time, so I'm going to create text. I'm going to say signal, so this is going to animate the opacity. And then let's just create the text node here. So you can just say text, and we can give it a text motion. So let's just give it some attributes here. We need to specify the X. So this is going to be actually the circle X. So again, how beautiful is this system? We can actually track the text on the circle. Now for the Y, we're also going to say, hey, you should follow the circle Y. So this is going to put it in the center of the circle. And now we can animate the opacity. So SVGs have this attribute literally named opacity. So we can say opacity. Now we can use the text value. Okay, so we can say text opacity. Wonderful. Now we can set the font size. So how can we increase and decrease the font size? Well, we can base it on the radius of the circle. Again, everything is coming full circle, pun intended. Alright, so now we can say circle R, but this is going to be too big. So let's multiply it by 0.4 so it's not as large. And let me just save this, and nothing is going on right now because we need to animate it, right? And also for the text, I'm going to center it. So this is a bit weird in SVG. We can say text anchor. And this is what always confuses me. It's not center, it's middle. And you also make sure to spell it properly. So text anchor, and there is another option for centering text. Dominant baseline. I know it sounds super weird, but it's really not important. Let's just do this and save it. And basically that's really everything you need for the text. And of course you can make your life easier by turning this into a component, but let's animate these values. So how can we animate this at the same time, right? So right now we're animating this circle to go through 300, but maybe we also want to say await text 2. And now we can also pass it some values. We can say opacity 1, and let's override the duration to be 2 seconds. So let's see if that works. So this should execute one after another. All right. Just refresh everything. So we can see our text is lost here. And let me see what it is, because it circles CX and CY. Awesome. So we can see, if I refresh, here is our text, and it takes some time to update. Let me see why are we animating. I see, we can just remove this. I just want this to go in one direction like this, and then this should fade in. So as you can see, our text is fading in nicely. Alright, but what if we want to do this at the same time? We have some other more complex animation. Well, basically, we can use promise.all, which takes promises and returns a single promise. Promise.all. And now we need to pass in an array of these promises, remove await. Let's also remove await from this. And now when I save this, this should happen at the same time. As you can see, it does. So now our circle animates and we get this motion text. Alright, but this is kind of annoying to use. I don't want our users to know about this, right? So we can actually make a helper function. So if we go below our signal function, we can just create function all. We can spread all the animations that we pass in, and then we can just return promise all animations, and that should be it. So now when we go here, we don't even have to know about all this junk. We can just import all from our library. Do this, and now everything should work. Let me just save everything, refresh. And that's it. Now our text fades in and everything works as expected. And let's increase the radius of the circle so we can see how the text also updates and it's going to be easier to see everything. So now instead of 40, we can set it to 80 here. And now we can see our giant circle. So if you want the text to be larger, let me just show you what it looks like by default if you remove it. Oh, and I just realized we didn't even specify that. Oh, look at me, how forgetful I am. So we can go to the actual circle here and let's just define it. So now we can set this to 40 or whatever. Let's just go to the R of the circle. Now we can say circle.r. And now this should be based on the size of the circle, right? So we can also animate the circle here. So we have CX. Let's also animate the radius. We're going to go from 40 to 80. And you can already start to see how beautiful this is. Look how awesome this is to use. Let me just save this. And look at this. This is awesome to me. You can just really see. And again, if you have issues with this circle, you can decrease the size. Here is how it looks out of control by default. So you can just use a value, multiply it or whatever. Some basic simple math and we get something awesome. Alright friends, so there is one less feature I want, and that is the ability to change sounds alongside animations. And why do I want that? But basically I think that sounds can truly add texture to your content and help you tell a story. If you ever seen one of those beautiful Vox videos or videos by someone like Johnny Harris, and this is really simple to implement. So we just go to our signal function here and I'm going to specify function. I'm going to name it SFX. Initially I named it play, but I was concerned that people are going to confuse it that it means to start the animation. So we can just pass it a sound and we can pass it some default options. So we can say volume and let's reduce the volume in half by default. And that's basically it. And if you're wondering where I got these sounds, I just got them from the internet. So you can place those sounds inside your static folder inside of SFX. And that's basically it. So now you can play the sound from your root. You don't have to import the sound or do anything special. So we just have to do const audio. We can just say new audio. And then we can pass it the sound, and that's it. And now we can also say audio volume is equal to volume. And of course, this system is naive. It doesn't really take into account the duration of the animation. So you can maybe make something more complicated. Maybe you can use an audio library. Maybe you can pass a function to the user itself so they get access to playing this sound so they can use any audio library they want. The possibilities are endless. So we just need to go here and we need to push this to the tasks. So we're going to say push. And that's basically it. So now we just need to say audio play, but there is one problem. Media files can't play automatically on the internet because you need to interact with the site. This is to prevent sites from being too obnoxious, right? So I'm going to show you that in a second, but let's not forget to return a reference to itself so we can chain this, right? That's basically everything you need to do. So here we also return this function and let's also use this sound right now. So maybe circle, when it's going to go to the right, maybe I want to use a sound effect, which is a swoosh. So we can use a transition. Transition, we can just pass it a string here. But you know what would be even better? If we just made an object so we don't have to remember it. So I'm going to go here at the top. So I can say const SFX. And then I can say transition, sound effects transition MP3. And I have another one which is tally. And that's it. Alright, so now we don't need to pass this ourselves. I can just go here. I can say sound effects transition. And you can hear it already works. So if you refresh the site, you won't be able to play this, right? Because the user didn't interact with the document first. And this error is confusing, so maybe we can make it nicer if we go here to our function. Let me see where it is. So this is also a promise, so we can say then, if this failed, actually not then, we can say catch for promises. And then we get the error, but I just want to put out a nicer error. So I'm going to say to play sounds, interact with the page first. And of course, this isn't a problem when you're doing a video, right? Because you're already going to be in the slide or whatever. And if you want to use this on a regular site, the user won't notice because this is just going to fail silently and your animation is going to play as usual. So if we go here, we can just refresh this. You can see you get this error message. So maybe console log, let's turn it into console error, just so it's more noticeable. And maybe we can play catch up. Let's see. Okay, so I interacted with the page in time, so it played a sound, right? But that's basically it. Alright friends, that's basically it for our library. So let's tidy things up before we create the last example. So we're just going to move this into a separate file. You can name this whatever you want. Let me just cut everything. So let's see, what do I have here? Yeah, we can just go from here. You can just go to the top. You want signal, animate. Let's just cut this. We're going to go here to source. And inside of lib, we can just say motion TS. And now make sure to export these functions. So we can export animate. We can export signal. And we can export all. We go here. Let's see if we can auto import, add all missing imports. Alright, so now we can get rid of these imports. Don't delete them though. We need to include them in our library here. Otherwise it's not going to work. So we're just going to yoink them over. That's it. As you can already see or hear in the background, everything works as expected. So if I refresh, of course, the sound isn't going to play. But as you can see, everything works the same as before. So now we can publish this library or do whatever we want. Alright friends, but let's first complete this library and add the types quickly. So for the function, we can just say that this is a function that returns a promise or nothing in this case. And for the signal, basically since we don't know the value that's passed in, we have to use a generic. So we can name this t, but I actually prefer to keep my names descriptive. So I can name this tween values or whatever else you want to name it. And then the values are going to carry this type, so they're going to be tween values. And for the options, we can use the built-in Svelte type. We can use tween options. So this is going to get imported for us here, type tween options. And this also expects a generic, so we can pass it our tween values just so we get the types. Awesome, and here for our tween store, we can also pass the generic, so we can say, okay, this is this shape. For our text, this is a bit gnarlier to type. We can just say array. We can also pass in a generic. So this is an array of what? Of functions. And we can also say functions are promises that return nothing. Basically, that's how we can type it. So this is a bit more annoying, what I don't like about TypeScript. How do you type this? This keyword, this? Well, basically, we have to do this, which is kind of gross. Like, you don't do this in regular JavaScript, but it's whatever. I don't even want to type it. It's not important. Alright, so for the values, we want to pass it the tween values. But TypeScript is going to complain at us and say, hey, you have to pass all of these options. Well, we can use the TypeScript utility to make every parameter optional. So we can do it like this. We can use the partial helper and we can say tween values. That's basically it. And for the options, we can use tween options. We can pass it tween values, same as before. And we can say or undefined if we don't want to pass any options, and then we can also initialize this as an empty object. Save this, and sound effects is really simple. Again, we need to do this weird thing with this. We have to pass it any. Sound is a string, and that's basically it. And inside of here, since this is complaining that we said this is a promise, we can just say, okay, this is async. And for this resolve option, you can go deep into this and type it properly, but I'm just going to say any because I'm not interested. So for the animations, we can say, okay, this is an array, and we can also pass it a generic. We can say, hey, these are functions that return basically nothing. So that's basically it. Or you can say promise void. And that's basically it for the types. And let's see if that's enough. And you can see we're already catching errors because of TypeScript. It says, hey, CY doesn't exist. And this is really true. I didn't even notice that we didn't pass CY, but yeah, basically that's really awesome. So now you have all this great completion when you're using the library. So let's just see if you're using circle, saying 2. So now for the auto completion, you get all of the available options. You get CX, fill, R, and etc. And that's basically the power of TypeScript. Alright, but I'm going to remove this and let's get to the last example. Alright, so we can close our library here and let me just delete everything. So we don't need all of this. So we can now use our library from scratch to recreate the example that I showed you. So I'm going to define SVG values that change over time. So I'm going to say signal. And I'm going to give it a negative margin. So we're going to be able to see the numbers from our grid. And I'm going to say -2. It is going to be 24. The height is going to be 24. And also, by the way, I didn't mention it, but maybe you don't want to always pass in an object in this signal. So let me just go here to a library. So maybe you can check here what type of value this is when it's pushed. Let me just find it where it is. So here when you have 2, maybe you can check, hey, if the user just passed a single number, then you can maybe just use the set method, right? So you can make it more flexible if you want. But for right now, I'm just going to keep it like this because I don't mind defining an object. And then I can say circle. I'm going to define a signal again. Going to be 2.5. Radius is going to be 1.5. And then let's give it an aquamarine fill. Let's say 0. And that's going to be it. I also need to define a text. We have signal, so we're going to tween the count, which again, how beautiful is this? We can tween any values, including numbers. which of course everything here is a number, but you get it in our UI, we can animate a count or whatever. Also, now let's give it an opacity. So now we can use the animate function. We can just pass it an async callback. But of course, as you already know, this is just a wrapper. So you can use onMount. You can trigger this from an event or whatever else you want. Cool. So now we can say await SVG. So now we can say sound effect. So we can play a sound. Effect transition. Then we can say 2. So we can say 0. And Y is also going to be 0. The width is going to be 10. And so now you can see how beautiful it is because we can actually animate the values of the SVG that you usually wouldn't be able to animate. This is going to create that cool camera effect. And then we can just say all. So we can animate the circle. We can say circle, play a sound effect. We're going to say sound effect transition 2. So now we're going to set it to 10. Y is going to be 10 also. Radius 3, and let's also change the fill color. So that's going to change the color of our circle. And then let's specify the SVG transition. Also, we can say SVG2, X is going to be 5, and Y is going to be 5. And the last thing we have to do is animate the text. So we can say await text, say 2. So let's animate the opacity to 1. And we can also change the duration to 0.3 seconds. And now we can also play a sound effect when this is done. So tally or the count sound. And then we can animate it further. We can animate the count to 10,000. And we can also give it a duration, 0.6 seconds. And this is the last part. So this is how simple this is. You can make an animation pretty quickly. So let me just create an SVG here. And I'm also going to create some style. So for the SVG, I'm going to say that width is going to be 600 pixels and the height is going to be 600 pixels. We're going to define a view box. So now we can just use our value. Simple as that. We can say dot svgx. We can say store svgy. And then let me just copy this over and we're going to change it. So this is going to be the width. This is going to be the height. So now let's add the circle. Is going to be the circle CX. CY is going to be circle CY. Or did you name it something else? Let me just see. Oh yeah, I kept it simple. I renamed this to X and Y. Okay, we can just do that. Thanks to TypeScript. And then we can also say for the radius, circle R, again, we get that great type completion. For the fill, we can do the same thing. We can say circle fill. So the last thing we have to do is add a text. So we can go here, we can just say text, and then we can add our numbers. So we can say text count, but here I have this useful utility for formatting numbers. So you can just say format number, and then we can just pass it here. And if you're curious what this does, it just uses the browser API. Let me just go here. Here are my utils. This just uses the Intel number format. So we can format the number to use a comma, and then we can also specify the fraction digits. Basically, that's it. All right, so the text is a bit different. We have to pass the X and Y. So we say X, which is going to be the same as the circle center. So we're just going to do the same for Y. So it's always at center. And then if you remember for the font size, how everything comes back around in circles, right? We can just do this. And then for the opacity, we can pass it text opacity. Let's say text anchor, middle, dominant baseline, middle, and then let's give it a fill here. So we're just going to make it black. I actually copied the grid so we don't have to type this out because we would never be finished. But again, I can just go here to the top. I can just spend a second to tell you what I've done here. It's really nothing intimidating. I'm just using SVG lines and groups here, so everything is neat and organized. So when you read the code or look at the example, you can understand what's going on. I'm just basically looping over how many squares there are. So I'm creating lines for each one, and then I'm creating these main lines, so the white lines, right? That's basically it. And then these are just the grid numbers. I'm just looping over these numbers, and then I'm positioning it. So basically that's really it. You can check out the REPL in the blog post as always. But yeah, let me just save this and let's see the moment of truth. And how beautiful is this, friend? So we can even break this animation down. Let's just see what's going on here. If I comment this out, let's see the first animation. Really, we're gonna do this. So you can see the first zoom in, and this is how you can gradually build up your animation. So now we're going to animate this, zooms into the grid right to that area, and then it's going to animate the circle going to the center, right? Zoom, zoom again to the center, and now we can add our final text animation. How beautiful is this, friends? Alright friends, that's it. If you like what you've seen, don't forget to like and subscribe, and you can also support me by becoming a patron. Thank you for watching, and catch you in the next one. Peace!